Imagine a king, crowned in gold, draped in velvet, worshipped by thousands. And yet, he hasn't bathed in months, his hair crawling with lice, his robes perfumed to mask a stench so strong it makes courtiers gag. This isn't a peasant from the mud-soaked fields. This is a ruler, a monarch, a man sitting on one of the most powerful thrones in Europe. Welcome to the hidden, filthy world of medieval kings, where perfume replaced soap and hygiene was a luxury far rarer than you might believe. To understand just how shocking the bathing habits of medieval royalty were, we first need to rewind to earlier civilizations. In ancient Rome, grand bathhouses were the pride of the empire. Citizens, both rich and poor, soaked in hot water, scrubbed with oils, and socialized in marble halls. In the Islamic world, hammams, steam-filled bathhouses, were central to both religious and cultural life, where cleansing was seen as both physical and spiritual. But in medieval Europe, the collapse of Rome left behind a very different attitude. Bathing was no longer a daily ritual. It became, at best, an occasional luxury, and at worst, a dangerous indulgence believed to spread disease. Let's begin with the kings themselves. You might imagine monarchs bathed daily in tubs of rose water, but the truth was far less glamorous. Take King Louis XIV of France, the Sun King himself. Known for his extravagant palace at Versailles, Louis reportedly took only a handful of baths in his entire life. Instead, he relied on layers of perfume to mask the odor. His courtiers often described the palace air as a choking blend of sweat, powder, and rot. Even more shocking is James VI of Scotland, who later became James I of England. He outright hated bathing, believing water weakened the body. James once claimed he only ever washed his fingers, occasionally. Yes, the most powerful men in Europe, men who dictated laws, led armies, and controlled empires, were walking clouds of filth. So how did they mask the stench? The answer lies in perfume. Perfume in the medieval royal courts wasn't just a luxury item, it was a necessity. Kings drenched their clothing, gloves, and even their wigs with heavy scents to disguise the smell of unwashed flesh. Louis XIV was said to bathe in perfume rather than water, his courtiers often overwhelmed by the overpowering aroma. But this was no sweet relief. The combination of sweat, rot, and strong oils created a suffocating atmosphere in royal halls. Instead of solving the problem, it only made it worse. Imagine walking into a grand banquet and being hit not by the smell of roasted meat and wine, but by the nauseating cocktail of human odor and musk. One of the biggest reasons medieval kings avoided bathing was fear. By the late Middle Ages, doctors believed water could open the pores of the body and allow disease to creep inside. Instead of cleansing, bathing was thought to invite plague and illness. King Henry IV of France, for example, was warned not to bathe more than once a year, as physicians believed it would make him weak. Others were told to wipe themselves with cloths or linen instead of washing in water. The irony? The very thing that could have protected them, simple hygiene, was rejected in the name of health. Without bathing, medieval kings lived in constant company with lice, fleas, and other vermin. Royal barbers were often tasked not just with trimming hair, but with combing out crawling lice. King Philip V of France's court was notorious for the swarms of vermin in his clothing. Queen Elizabeth I of England, though not a king, famously scratched herself raw from lice infestations. Even royal beds were not safe. Mattresses were rarely changed, and sheets could go months without washing. Courtiers wrote of kings scratching themselves during council meetings, sometimes pulling out lice or fleas mid-conversation. For rulers who were meant to embody divinity and power, their private lives were infested with crawling reminders of decay. Here's the cruel irony. While kings avoided water, many ordinary townsfolk had more access to cleanliness than their rulers. Throughout the early Middle Ages, public bathhouses, remnants of Roman culture, still existed in towns and cities. Merchants, travelers, and commoners could pay a small fee to soak and scrub. Yet kings in their palaces rejected the practice. By the 16th century, public baths were closing across Europe due to fear of disease and moral panic about immorality. But by then, royal hygiene had long since decayed. The peasants in the village might have bathed more often than the monarchs who ruled them. So far, we've uncovered rulers who hated bathing, kings drenched in perfume instead of soap, and royal courts infested with lice. But the story doesn't end there, because when medieval kings did attempt to bathe, the rituals were just as bizarre, wasteful, and sometimes deadly. In the next part of this documentary, we'll dive deeper, from bizarre royal bath rituals to deadly diseases spread through filth, and even the shocking truth about what courtiers had to endure simply to survive in the shadow of their king's stench. When kings did bathe, it wasn't a simple splash of water. It was a full royal performance. Imagine a massive wooden tub lined with cloth, filled bucket by bucket, with warm water carried by servants. Herbs, oils, and even milk might be poured in to soften the skin. For the wealthiest monarchs, the bath itself became a spectacle. King John of England was said to bathe in rose petals, while others demanded scented herbs like rosemary and lavender. Servants stood by with towels, perfumes, and sponges. But here's the twist. These baths were rare. A king might only go through such a ritual a few times a year, sometimes just once before major feasts or holy days. It wasn't about cleanliness. It was about display, power, and ritual. Filth in royal palaces didn't stop at the body. Hygiene, or lack of it, extended to the entire household. In the great halls of medieval castles, rushes, bundles of straw spread across the floor, were rarely changed. Food scraps, spilled wine, and even human waste mixed into the layers. Courtiers described a stench so powerful it clung to the very stones. The lack of bathing only made things worse. Kings, their courtiers, and servants lived in an environment where lice, fleas, and disease thrived. Outbreaks of dysentery, smallpox, and even plague often tore through the royal household. Some historians even argue that the poor hygiene of kings directly influenced their health, and by extension, the stability of kingdoms. Bathing was one issue, but toilets were another nightmare altogether. Even in palaces, garderobes were nothing more than stone seats built over holes in the wall, where waste dropped down into pits or moats. The smell was overwhelming, and the pits were rarely cleaned. At Versailles, chamber pots overflowed. Servants were forced to empty them in hallways, stairwells, or even out windows. Visitors often remarked on the stench of urine and rot drifting through the palace gardens. So when kings avoided bathing, it wasn't just their own bodies that stank. It was their entire world. Another layer of filth came with fashion. Royal clothing was elaborate, layered, and rarely washed. Heavy velvets and silks were expensive, and cleaning them risked damage. Instead, monarchs wore the same outfits again and again, sometimes until they rotted. To hide the smell, garments were doused in perfume. Wigs, a staple of 17th century courts, were often crawling with lice. Powdered to look pristine, they were in fact filthy, itchy, and foul-smelling. The wig rooms of Versailles were said to reek of sweat and rancid powder. Now contrast this with the rest of the world. In the Ottoman Empire, rulers like Suleiman the Magnificent bathed regularly in magnificent hammams. Cleanliness was a religious duty in Islamic culture, and rulers were expected to set an example. In Japan, emperors and nobles engaged in ritual purification with water, and communal baths were common even for ordinary people. While Europe's monarchs sat on gilded thrones drenched in perfume, rulers elsewhere embraced hygiene as a sign of both health and divinity. The difference could not have been more stark. So when did things change? By the 18th and 19th centuries, new understandings of medicine began to spread. Physicians slowly realized that water did not cause disease, it prevented it. The rise of plumbing made regular bathing possible, and rulers began to set new standards. Napoleon Bonaparte, for example, famously enjoyed long baths, sometimes soaking for hours. Queen Victoria's reign saw plumbing installed in palaces, with proper bathtubs replacing wooden tubs. But for centuries before this shift, Europe's kings ruled in filth, their stench masked by nothing more than layers of perfume and denial. So what does all of this tell us? It reminds us that history's most powerful men were not untouchable gods, but human beings, crawling with lice, scratching in their robes and walking clouds of perfume. The image of the medieval kings, majestic, divine, untouchable, hides a much dirtier truth. These rulers commanded armies, built cathedrals, and shaped nations, while living lives that would today make us recoil in disgust. It's a sobering reminder. Power and wealth do not guarantee cleanliness, health, or even common sense. If you enjoyed uncovering the grimy, revolting side of history, Don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more dark tales from the past, and ring the bell so you never miss an episode of A Dark History, because sometimes the truth about kings is far dirtier than the crown suggests.